Hey there, Metals 2 and 3. In this video, I'm going to be going over how to make a die-formed base for your pewter tavern mug. So here you can see that I trimmed off the excess that I had at the top in the base here, so it's nice and flat. So I just trimmed that off, filed it a bit, and then used some 60 grit sandpaper and just sort of sanded this on a flat surface so that this is nice and flat. And then, like I said, I'm going to be die forming, so I'm using the hydraulic press, and I have this die that I'm going to be using, this hexagon shape. So here's my sheet of pewter that I'm going to be using, and you want, for your tavern mugs, you don't actually want to solder a flat base on the bottom. The reason being, sometimes when you're soldering something flat, it may not actually be perfectly flat as you think it is, and then when you go to set something on the table, it might like wobble a little bit or sit unevenly. So I'm going to be die forming this so that if I was to look in the center here, basically there's going to be like that hexagon is going to be convex on the inside, but if I looked at it on the bottom, it's going to be concave, and there's just going to be a little bit of flat sheet metal on the outside here, so that's how that'll sit, and it'll just sit more securely that way on the table when there's basically as little flat metal touching as possible. Something else that you can do that does look nice that I've done in the past is I've actually made dies where basically I just have my sheet of acrylic or plexi, and I've drilled 3 large holes in here, and then basically those holes pop out so that they would be convex on the outside, so I've got like 3 little feet kind of that it just rests on. So that's another good way to make some little feet for your piece so that it'll, again, sit securely. All right, so now I'm gonna start die forming this metal. All right, so I've got my sheet of acrylic. I'm just gonna put this in here in the center. Put my sheet of pewter in there too, and of course I always like to have at least a 1/2 inch of excess sheet metal on the outside, even a little bit more, that can be fine too. Here we go. So the acrylic goes in there first, then my piece of pewter on top. Now I'll just grab piece of rubber, so I think that this should be good. And sandwich it in there. You can probably see that I already jacked up my press quite a bit, just because I didn't want to make you sit there and watch me raise it up for like 5 minutes. All right. And you always want to do this little by little when you're die forming, but especially because pewter is so soft, I found it's really easy to go overboard and put too much pressure on it. So I'm just going to take this up to about 2,000 psi for right now. I'll release it. See how that looks. So there have been times in the past when I'm die forming pewter and I actually accidentally did too much. Okay, so that didn't do very much at all, so we'll put it back in and repeat the process. Bit there. So I'm going to do 1 or 2 more pressings, and then I think that should be good. It doesn't need to be super deep, but I do want this to be just a little more convex. die-formed piece. So you can see it's kind of sort of hard to get an angle on the camera right here, but this is pretty shallow, but it should be good. So this part that's going in a little bit, that's concave, that's gonna be on the bottom, and this part that's sticking up a bit, that's gonna go on the inside. So then, here, let me see if I can get a good angle of that. So when you look inside, this is what you'll see about, ooh, that looks kind of cool. So I'm just gonna try to center this as best as I can, and then I'll just trace on the pewter sheet right here, I'll trace the outside of my base right on there, and I'll trim off that excess. Something else I'm going to do, just because you can probably see that I've got some scratches on here, that's totally fine. I'm just gonna sand this with some 60 grit sandpaper, so it kind of has a rough sandpaper finish, but it'll look nice and even. And I just like that kind of detail. I think I may have mentioned it before, but I find it's really hard to get like a really nice fine sandpaper finish on pewter, just because it scratches so easily, even if you're not handling it, you know, in a really aggressive manner. So usually the highest grit of sandpaper I'll go up to when working with pewter is just 180. But I also kind of like the look of that 60 grit, that kind of like rough surface. I think it's kind of a nice detail at the bottom of the base. So I'll do that and then trim this off. So now I'm gonna start flaring out the top of my rim right here. You can see that I drew a Sharpie line on the inside, so I'm actually gonna flare this out and then eventually roll that edge over by forming it with the hammer and also using the hydraulic press. So I'm just gonna start hammering it with a plastic mallet. So I'm using this that has a nice tip there, and I'm using this stake. And I'm just gonna hammer this so that I start from the inside, so I start flaring this out and over. Alright, so this looks like it's a good start. So you can see I've got a little flare right there. And now I'm gonna put this in the hydraulic press to really help fold this over a bit more. Just sitting in the press, and I'm just gonna really carefully start cranking it up. I'm gonna keep an eye on my piece so that I can see the rim sort of starting to flatten a bit and roll over. But I just want to take this really slowly because it's really easy to do a little bit too much. Here we go. So this looks good. And I'll just release the pressure completely. And then here I've got this rounded lip. You can see that it's kind of uneven and really sticking out in some parts. That's not a big deal. I'm just gonna go over this, over the blowhorn stake, using my planishing hammer that I used to texture the rest of my mug. So that way I'll flatten this rolled over edge and also apply that texture that I think looks so nice. And then something else that I'll probably do as well once I've got it hammered, you can see just doing that, it's sort of misshaped the rim a bit. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna, you know, go in there and hammer that out. But just make sure if you do have any bumps or anything like that, you take care of that before soldering the base on, because that's really the point of no return. It's very difficult to round off any inconsistencies in your mug once that base is soldered on there. Okay, so here's the rim of my Tavern mug now. So you saw how I went in just with that plastic mallet to begin with to finish rounding that over and sort of flatten it out. Then I went over with my planishing hammer to get that nice texture on there, and then switched back, so I rounded it back out. So you can see that's pretty circular now. And then the last thing I did there was I took my planishing hammer and just placed my mug on top of a sandbag so that I could texture right on top here. I think that textured rim is just a nice detail. All right, so this looks good. So like I said, if your piece is a little distorted at all, just double check that and then round it off as best you can. And then the next video is going to be soldering the base onto your mug.